How a romance novel saved the galaxy by Ariana de Relte. Chapter 48. Plo Koon 5. Faye's amusement had disappeared by the time they arrived at the gates of the Sundari Harmony School. The name of the school was painted in cheery letters over the gates, but it was faded and hard to see. There was graffiti on the sides of the gate which said such things as Nasade and You Don't Belong Here. Inside the unlocked gates there were children playing in a poorly maintained courtyard which was brightly lit by huge lights on the ceiling. Much to Plo's dismay, this really was the obvious location for all the children who didn't meet the New Mandalorian speciest and racist criteria. There were still a lot of blonde-haired children, but they were accompanied by multiple skin colors and a whole range of other hair colors. He spotted at least 2 children with horns poking through hair, another who was obviously part Nautolan with black solid eyes and tiny tentacles instead of hair, and a full or partially blooded Deveronian female with pink skin, pointed ears, and sharp teeth.
"Why wasn't I informed of your arrival?"
said the fussy voice of a typical protocol droid. They turned to see a modified droid. Their chase is painted a pale orange.
"We weren't aware we needed to report to you,"
said Plo.
"We are Jedi Masters Plo and Faye, here on an investigation."
There were several children watching them surreptitiously, so we didn't want to go into too much detail.
"I am Principal L3D6, but you may call me DD as many of the students seem to prefer it. May I see your authorization?"
Apparently, this school didn't warrant a human principal like all the other New Mandalorian schools.
"Governor Almec has authorized everyone to cooperate with our investigation," said Faye.
"I'm afraid we are often left out of the loop here at Harmony. It is very frustrating to my circuits," said Lily.
"I will send a comm to confirm. In the meantime, let us talk in my office."
They headed inside, though Plo paused to return the wave of a young child with patches of white skin scattered across a dark brown base color. Once in the office, Plo wasted no time outlining their mission. It was hard to tell emotions in a protocol droid, but Lidi's attitude relaxed.
"I have submitted 13 reports over the past 2 years about the disappearance of children under my care before I was ordered to stop submitting them," they admitted. "I am neither authorized nor equipped to investigate myself."
"Can you compare this list we have to children you believe have gone missing?"
asked Plo. He handed them the data chip with the list. It took Lidi less than a minute to examine the list, then make some marks on it before returning it to them.
"I have highlighted the names of my students who are missing. They make up 67% of your list. Moreover, your list confirms that only 22 of those missing are with the Mandalorians who follow a more traditional path. This is concerning."
To put it mildly.
"Do you know how they are going missing?"
Plo asked.
"I do not believe they are being taken from the school itself, since those who live here are less likely to be taken according to my analysis," said Lidi.
"Some of them live here in the school?" asked Faye, concern evident in her voice. None of the other Mandalorian schools had been boarding schools. Lidi regarded them steadily before lowering their voice modulator.
"My third programming directive is to take care of the students in the school. Many of the parents cannot cope with children who are different. I offer any child who is being abused or neglected the opportunity to stay in one of the wings of the school. I have incorporated them into the extracurricular budget."
The droid sounded particularly satisfied at that solution. Plo was feeling a bit devastated. It seems Mandalore, or at least Sundari, had orphanages after all. Lidi's solution to protect their students from abuse was clever, but it meant that the children who lived in this school must be raising each other and getting no treatment for the abuse they had suffered.
"If you contacted the true Mandalorians, all those children would be loved and accepted into families who want them,"
he suggested.
"One of my prime programming directives forbids me from talking to or discussing any Mandalorians who wear armor."
That was the second time the droid had worked around saying true Mandalorians. Plo had to wonder if Lidi was completely forbidden from even saying true Mandalorian. Was Lidi forbidden from saying Death Watch as well?
"Nor am I allowed to teach anything besides the New Mandalorian curriculum."
That might be a yes. Plo doubted the New Mandalorian curriculum even dealt with modern political factions.
"What are you able to do?"
asked Faye, a clever question.
"Until recently, when I realized they were not responding to my reports, I encouraged the children to explore the city and experience their culture." Sundari had an excellent art museum, according to the brochure Plo had been handed the first day, but there was nothing about a history museum. Still, just walking around increased the children's chances of encountering a true Mandalorian who would see their plight. Unfortunately, that probably also meant they were encountering Deathwatch as well. I also present many educational options for my students and encourage them to consider careers outside the city where they might encounter alternatives to the new Mandalorian curriculum. Of course, there are some whose parents care for them and the children don't wish to leave, but their parents are trapped by their own differences or the prejudice against those who produce children outside of the norm. What Lidi described was a systemic system, sadly. Racism and speciesism against the adults and their children if they looked different. Parents who could pass but produced children who couldn't and either suffered for doing so or abandoned and abused the children for looking different. Children who were isolated and grew up not knowing they were on a planet where children were cared for and loved everywhere except for New Mandalorian territory. Plo had suspected this might be happening ever since he read the file on the New Mandalorians, but it was a blow to see it confirmed.
May we speak to some of the children?
He asked, even as he considered if there was a way, as part of his mission, that he could relieve some of these children's pain.
Ones who go out more often, or that you think might know more about the disappearances.
I believe that can be arranged, said Lady. I have received confirmation of your investigation, so I will set up a room for you and the children to meet. I am sending authorization to all my teachers for you to remove children from classes if it is needed for the investigation. Please wait here. Half an hour later, they were led to a rather shabbily decorated classroom. Its walls were painted a bright yellow to try to lighten up the fact that it had no windows and low ceilings. 3 children of various ages were waiting for them. The young one he'd seen before with vitiligo, a pale-skinned blonde-haired child with just visible Zabrakian horns peering out of their hair, and a teenager with red-brown skin and long black hair. Children, these are Jedi Masters Plo and Faye who are investigating the children who have gone missing from Harmony. They wish only to know that the children are safe and happy. Masters, this is Helia. Lidi gestured at the children with vitiligo. She is friends with one of the most recently missing. Next to her is Kromek. This was the part Zabrak child. He is often out and about in the city. The boy looked down at Lidi's statement. And finally, this is Moji. He is the oldest student who lives here and often looks after the little ones. Moji was staring at them boldly, distrust evident on his face. That distrust would need to be softened before they would get anywhere with these children. Plo had them draw their desks into a circle and started in on a tale about one of his missions. Lidi made excuses to leave, probably so they could talk freely without the droid's programming interfering. Little Helia was delighted by the story, while Kromek and Moji were reluctantly drawn in. Plo wished he could share some Mandalorian tales with them as well, though the Mandalorian's dilemma hadn't gone into much detail on any specific story. Faye surprised him, however. When he was finished, she smoothly transitioned into a tale about how the first Mandalorians, the Tong, had turned mythosaur bones into Beskar, which is why Beskar was sometimes called the Bones of Mandalore. She sent him an image of reading the story with Obi-Wan. Apparently, the 2 Mandalorians gave their newly adopted children orientation materials. Is that the real story? Asked Kromek skeptically. All stories are real stories, said Faye with a wink. Kromek groaned. Moji reluctantly stirred. The teenager had actually grabbed some flimsy from the desk he was sitting at to write down Faye's story. It sounds real, he says. I'll tell it to the Nighties tonight. By Nighties, Plo assumed he meant the children who stayed overnight in the school.
Your curriculum doesn't teach you much about traditional Mandalorian culture, language, and history,
asked Plo, though we already knew the answer. We all know what Nasade means at this point, said Moji, though Plo noted he reflexively looked around to make sure there were no teachers before he said the Mando a word. But finding out anything else is tough. Like, there were rumors that the Mandalorians outside of Sindari treat kids really differently, but are they going to make us all fight? Do they really not care what anyone looks like? Nobody knows and the adults won't talk about it. Sometimes the kids will leave send back messages saying it's great or strange or they have a new family, but lots of times we don't hear anything back.
I was told that all children who leave for the True Mandalorians know to calm their friends to let them know they're okay,
said Plo. Well, no one told that to us, said Moji bluntly. And aren't they all just Mandalorians?
I'm afraid there are 3 factions in Mandalorian politics at the moment, the new Mandalorians, the true Mandalorians, and Death Watch. Both Death Watch and the true Mandalorians wish to maintain Mandalore's warrior culture, but for Death Watch, that involves terrorism and kidnapping children, whereas the true Mandalorians believe children are the future and should be treated well.
Wait, said Cromwell. There's two different groups going around trying to grab kids?
Cock, said Moji, then turned to his side. Don't repeat that, Helia, he said sternly. The little girl nodded.
Do they all wear armor? How do we tell them apart?
Asked Cromwell.
My understanding is that Death Watch often wears blue and gray colors on their armor. However, for a mission like this, they may be changing their armor colors so as not to arouse suspicion.
Plo hoped that the new Mandalorian police would have noticed if Mandalorians in full Death Watch armor were wandering their city.
I see blue and armor all the time, but like blue and gray?
Said Cromwell. He was looking very thoughtful.
If I wear a headdress, I can go anywhere in the city. No one bothers me then,
he said, gesturing at his horns. Plo nodded to show his understanding.
So I go to visit my mom and I play with kids from other schools. One time, me and a friend got approached by an adult in armor. They asked if we knew what real Mandalorians were like, then told us about fighting and jetpacks and exploring the galaxy.
But you didn't go with them.
I wasn't going to leave my mom, said Cromwell scornfully. But my friend did seem interested. I think they must have met up with them later because I haven't seen them since. And this was months ago.
They didn't come?
Cromwell looked worried.
No.
Did you have any indication that they might have taken you by force if you said no?
Plo doubted every child was agreeing to leave, but probably a large proportion were.
They seemed kind of annoyed, but they just told me to go home if I wasn't interested.
A quick check of Cromwell's friend's name showed they weren't on the true Mandalorians list, but they were on the list from what Plo had identified as the middle-class new Mandalorian schools. It seemed likely they'd willingly gone with Death Watch, not knowing what they were getting into. Plo asked Cromwell to show them on a map where he'd been approached.
I can ask everyone else if they've had someone talk to them and tell me where. Then you can figure out if there's a pattern, said Cromwell eagerly.
That is an excellent idea, and would be very appreciated, Cromwell. Why don't we break for lunch?
The children's hunger was growing quite loud in the force. Lunch was enjoyable, if a little saddening. Although many of the children showed great resiliency, there were some who were understandably angry about how they were treated, while others showed signs of trying to hide who they were. The Devaronian girl was wearing full-body makeup which turned her red skin to a passably human pink. Moji wasted no time sharing information about the true Mandalorians and Death Watch with the entire cafeteria. The droids, who appeared to make up not just the principal, but the whole teaching body of the school, had pointedly gone elsewhere during lunch. Leedy's influence, no doubt. Plo and Faye ended up spending lunch answering as many questions about the difference between the two groups as they could, as well as sharing what they knew of actual Mandalorian culture and adoption practices. It was sad to think that simply by reading The Mandalorian's Dilemma, Plo knew more Mandoa than these children. After lunch, they retired to the same shabby classroom and examined Cromwell's crowdsourced map. Although there was no pattern to the children who had been approached in the lower levels of the city, those who were able to play in the upper plazas had narrowed it down to 3 different places where children often congregated, all of them within reach of the upper-level schools. They would have to go back to the police and hope they had kept surveillance for those 3 places.
Thank you very much for helping. You did an excellent job,
he said to a rightfully proud Cromwell.
Helia, is there something you'd like to share?
Asked Plo kindly. The 7-year-old had been uncertain about something since lunch. She had climbed into his lap after they arrived back at the classroom. She nodded, then pulled out a child's pad which had seen better days. Helia pulled up a message. Plo had a bad feeling about this message, especially when he saw it was from Helia's missing friend. Concordia, said Faye grimly. Plo could clearly imagine a 7-year-old frantically typing their misspelled destination on their comm before it was taken from them. It was dated to the week before.
We must keep moving,
said Plo, urgency gripping him. However, there was another urgent matter to take care of. His solution would most likely ruin the Jedi's reputation with the new Mandalorians when they found out, but Plo wasn't going to leave any children in this situation who wished to leave.
We are heading back to the true Mandalorian part of the city to brief Duke Kryz on our results.
Plow had a feeling the Duke would be able to get the surveillance out of the police much easier than they would, without using mind tricks, that is.
Anybody who wishes to walk with us is welcome to do so.
That way, none of them who wished to join the true Mandalorians would go with Death Watch, accidentally. Comic and Moji exchanged glances.
I'm staying to look after the 90s,
said Moji firmly. Plo made a note to try to get some of the true Mandalorian cultural materials so the teenager could learn about his culture, despite his admirable decision to stay to look after the younglings.
I can't leave my mom,
said Cromwell softly. Unlike when he was discussing the offer from Death Watch, he seemed a bit torn.
An admirable choice,
said Plo.
Nobody is being forced to leave. I simply wished to give everyone the option of getting to the true Mandalorians safely and without being preyed upon by Death Watch. Will you spread the word? The teachers will allow anyone to leave class if it's to help our investigation.
Lindy really was a clever droid. The boys went off to do so. When they left for the Kriz clan compound nearly an hour later, a crowd of children following behind them, Helia's tiny hand was in his.
All the Mandalorians I met before you were torturing children,
said Hiam, causing Red to blink away the sleep from his eyes. Hiam hadn't told him how he'd ended up on the run from a whole mysterious clan of Mandalorians with a child in tow.
They aren't Mandalorians, if they're doing so. We'd call them Damanda.
Now Red was watching Hiam's face carefully, but he had his face set with the jetty blankness Red detested.
I didn't recognize the clan insignia of the ones who were attacking you.
For all the Mandalore had a battle leader, a Mandalore, they weren't a very united people. Countless clans were settled across not just the Mandalore sector, but also spread out across the galaxy.
I know you and your clan have nothing to do with them, but I can't rule out that they are allied with someone on this planet. The autopilot on my ship brought me right to this area.
Hiam put a hand on the back of his neck and pulled him into a Keldabe kiss. Red relaxed into it.
We should head toward Clan Awards compound. It will give you and Kiri sanctuary, you have my word.